In the heart of the ancient world, sprawled across a peninsula of searing heat and endless sand, lies a land of stark, breathtaking beauty. This is Arabia, a realm of extremes where life clings precariously to the edges of oases and the shadows of mountains. For millennia, its people, the Bedouin tribes, navigated this unforgiving world with a resilience born of necessity. They understood the rhythms of the sun, the whispers of the wind, and the life-giving promise of a distant well. But they also understood that they were not alone. They believed that in the shimmering heat haze, in the hollows of desolate ruins, and in the deep, eerie silence of the night, another creation lived alongside them, unseen. These were not gods, nor were they men. They were the Jinn. Long before the great monotheistic faith swept across the peninsula, this belief was woven into the very fabric of Arabian life. The Jinn were not mere ghosts, not the lingering spirits of the dead. They were a parallel race, believed to have tangible bodies and to form tribes and clans much like human society. They were seen as the animistic soul of the landscape itself, forces of nature given form and will. The howl of the wind through a narrow canyon was not just a trick of acoustics, it was a voice. A sudden, spiraling dust devil was not merely weather, it was a Jinn passing by. They were the explanation for the inexplicable, the sudden illness that strikes a healthy man, the maddening whisper that torments a lone traveler, the misfortune that befalls a journey without cause. In a world governed by powers both seen and unseen, the Jinn were the ever-present, invisible reality that could shape the fortunes of the living. The relationship with these beings was as complex and shifting as the sands themselves. It was a life lived in a state of constant awareness, marked by a deep, instinctual fear, but also by a curious degree of reverence. The Jinn were capricious. Some were seen as benign, even helpful, while others were malevolent tricksters. To survive, one had to know the rules, to understand the rituals necessary for coexistence. Travelers learned to utter charms for protection, and it was common practice to ask for permission, to say "destur" before entering a dark or abandoned place. These were not fairy tales told to frighten children. They were practical measures for navigating a world teeming with hidden powers. They were a fundamental part of the pre-Islamic cosmology, invisible neighbors whose presence demanded caution, respect, and a delicate, ongoing diplomacy. Our story begins here, in this primal landscape, where we will explore who these beings were in the oral traditions and poetry of the tribes, how they were understood as powerful shapeshifters who walked the line between the animal and human worlds, and how they inspired both terror and art. From there, we will witness their extraordinary transformation. With the advent of Islam in the 7th century, the belief in Jinn was not abolished. Instead, it was absorbed, recontextualized, and redefined within a strict monotheistic framework. No longer just amoral nature spirits, the Jinn were elevated into a formal, scriptural reality, becoming one of God's 3 intelligent creations, alongside angels and human beings. We will delve into the sacred texts of the Qur'an and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad to understand how these beings were given new purpose, a new moral dimension, and ultimate accountability for their actions. We will meet their most famous and fearsome classifications, the mighty Ifrit, the rebellious Marid, and the flesh-eating Ghoul, and uncover the stories that gave them their power. Finally, we will follow their trail as it winds through centuries of human history. From the high theology of Islamic scholars and the fantastic tales of the Arabian Nights, to the enduring folk practices and the modern cinema screen, we will trace the astonishing resilience of this belief. It is a story of myth, faith, and the enduring human fascination with the unseen. It is the story of a presence that has haunted the human imagination for millennia, a creature of smokeless fire who continues to fascinate, frighten, and hold a mirror to our own world. To the people of pre-Islamic Arabia, The Jinn were creatures of immense and terrifying power, primarily because they were masters of transformation. They were the ultimate shapeshifters, their forms as fluid and unpredictable as the desert itself. Though normally invisible, they were not incorporeal. Ancient sources held that Jinn possessed tangible bodies known as ajsam, and that they could choose to manifest in the physical world in a bewildering variety of forms. This ability made them a constant and unsettling presence. The animal that crossed your path, the stranger you met at a well, the snake that took shelter in the cool of your home, any of them could be a Jinn in disguise. Their preferred forms were often those of animals, especially creatures with a chthonic reputation, beings connected to the earth and the underworld. Snakes were a particular favorite. In the ancient Near East, the snake was a deeply ambiguous symbol, representing at once healing and danger, wisdom and deceit. A snake found in one's house was therefore treated with extreme caution. It was common practice to grant it a grace period of 3 days, a formal warning to depart. If it remained after that time, it was presumed to be an ordinary animal, or perhaps an evil Jinn, and could be killed. But to harm one without this warning was to risk a terrible, swift retaliation from its kin. Other forms were also common: the scorpion, the lizard, the dog, all creatures of the dust and the dark places. When a Jinn chose to take on a human form, the transformation was rarely perfect. The old stories are filled with cautionary tales of men and women who interacted with a seemingly normal person, only to notice a single, telltale sign of their true, otherworldly nature. Perhaps it was the unsettling vertical slit of their pupils, like those of a cat or a snake, or a brief glimpse of a foot that was not a foot at all, but the cloven hoof of a goat. It might be a voice that held an unnatural echo, or a strength that defied human limits. These subtle imperfections were the cracks in their disguise, a chilling reminder that the person you were speaking to was something other, something ancient and powerful, merely wearing a human mask. This physical nature meant that the Jinn were not invincible. Though more powerful than humans, they could be harmed and they could be killed. Oral traditions were rich with the stories of lone heroes and brave travelers who managed to slay a Jinn in combat. If killed, the creature's body would not simply vanish. It would leave behind a strange carcass, a final clue to its true nature. Sometimes it was the body of a great snake or a monstrous scorpion, a physical confirmation that the battle had been won against a creature from another realm. Perhaps most remarkably, the pre-Islamic Arabs did not see the Jinn as a chaotic, disorganized horde of monsters. They imagined them as a parallel society, a mirror to their own complex tribal world. Commentators like the later scholar Al-Yahiz noted that the pagan Arabs believed Jinn organized themselves into tribes and clans, complete with lineages, chieftains, and political rivalries, just like the Bedouin. This belief gave the Jinn a social and political dimension. An offense against a single Jinn was not just an offense against an individual. It was a potential spark for a blood feud with an entire invisible tribe. This complex understanding of their forms, their society, and their very real physical presence created a world where the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was dangerously thin and constantly shifting. But what, precisely, were these beings? Scholars have long debated the origins of the Jinn concept in Arabia. Some propose that they began simply as mischievous and often dangerous nature spirits, the personification of the perils of the wilderness. In this view, they were the animistic soul of the places humans feared: the searing wind, the crushing silence of a ruin, the darkness of a cave. They were a way to give a name and a face to the impersonal dangers of the natural world, transforming random misfortune into the malevolent act of an unseen agent. They were often seen as dwelling in unclean or remote areas, hostile to the intrusion of humanity. Others have suggested a more complex origin, arguing that the Jinn were originally the pagan deities and tutelary gods of local tribes. According to this theory, as the great high gods of the wider pantheon grew in importance, these smaller local deities were gradually downgraded in status. They didn't disappear from belief, but they were demoted from gods to be worshipped into spirits to be placated. In certain northern Arabian regions, like the ancient cities of Palmyra and Baalbek, the line between the two was blurry. Inscriptions show that the term Jinn, or its local equivalent, sometimes overlapped with the word Ilah, meaning God, indicating that these beings were at times regarded as minor divinities. The 19th century historian Julius Wellhausen offered a brilliant insight into this distinction. He noted that the pre-Islamic Arabs distinguished gods from Jinn not by their morality. Jinn were not necessarily evil, but by the manner in which they were worshipped. The major gods like Hubal or Al-Lat had public cults. They had temples, idols, and formal communal ceremonies. The Jinn, on the other hand, were venerated privately. Their cults were personal, intimate, and often secret. An individual might leave an offering for a Jinn at a particular rock or tree, seeking its favor or protection, but this was a personal act, not a public ritual. This suggests that belief in the Jinn ran parallel to the more formal idol worship of the tribes. It was a deeper, more ancient layer of animistic belief, a kind of folk religion that dealt with the immediate, everyday concerns of life. When a person needed help with a matter the high gods might not handle, like finding a lost camel or cursing an enemy, they might turn to the local spirits. While the pre-Islamic Arabs did recognize a difference between these beings and the great divine powers, the lines could blur. Some Jinn were seen as benevolent protectors of a specific tribe or a locale, not unlike the guardian angels of later traditions or the household gods of the Greeks. But the default stance was always one of caution. Even a friendly Jinn was unpredictable, its moods as shifting as the desert wind. This complex identity, somewhere between a spirit, a demon, and a forgotten god, is what made the Jinn such a powerful and enduring force in the pre-Islamic imagination. The relationship between the pre-Islamic Arabs and the Jinn was therefore a delicate and often terrifying balancing act. It was a life lived with a constant awareness of these powerful, invisible neighbors, a life that required a complex set of rituals and precautions to maintain a fragile peace. The default emotion was fear, but it was a fear tempered with a degree of reverence. The Jinn were capricious, their actions unpredictable. Some were seen as helpful, even kind, while others were malevolent tricksters, and one could never be certain which kind one was dealing with. To avoid incurring their wrath, people developed a rich tapestry of folk practices. Offerings and sacrifices were reportedly left at certain powerful sites: a strangely shaped rock, an ancient solitary tree in the desert, a dark cave, all in an effort to placate the local Jinn who were believed to inhabit them. These were not the grand public sacrifices offered to the high gods, but small personal gifts meant to earn the favor, or at least the neutrality, of the spirit whose territory one was entering. The goal was to show respect, to acknowledge the Jinn's power, and to hopefully be left alone. Travelers were particularly vulnerable. A person moving through the desolate and lonely places of the world was entering the very heart of the Jinn's domain. To protect themselves, they would utter charms or hang talismans, small objects believed to have the power to ward off evil spirits, often called shay'am or devils. A traveler finding himself alone at night, far from the safety of a caravan, might draw a circle in the sand around him and recite a quick prayer or incantation. This circle was a magical barrier, a temporary sanctuary that evil Jinn were believed to be unable to cross. These were not idle superstitions. They were essential survival tools for navigating a world filled with unseen dangers. Certain locations were understood to be haunts of the Jinn, places of concentrated supernatural power that required extreme caution. Lonely caves, ancient tombs, or a solitary tree in the vast emptiness of the desert were all considered to be potent real estate in the Jinn world. To approach them was to risk trespassing, and to do so without the proper respect was to invite disaster. It is this belief that gave rise to one of the most enduring folk practices, the polite warning. It was common for Arabs to say, "Destur," permission, or other similar phrases when throwing wastewater, especially at night, or when entering a dark and potentially Jinn-inhabited place. This was a simple courtesy, a way of announcing one's presence to any unseen spirits, ensuring one did not accidentally harm or disrespect them. The Jinn were also held responsible for a wide range of human afflictions. Sudden illnesses, especially those with no visible cause, were often attributed to the touch of a Jinn. Mental illness, in particular, was seen as a sign of their influence. A person suffering from madness was said to be majnun, a word whose very root is Jinn, literally meaning Jinn afflicted. This deep linguistic connection reveals just how intertwined these spirits were with the understanding of the human mind and body. The Jinn were not just a remote, abstract threat. They were a direct and personal danger that could invade one's home, one's body, and one's very sanity. These folk practices, these small daily acts of caution and respect, show how deeply the belief in Jinn was embedded in the pre-Islamic worldview, a constant and powerful presence that shaped the rhythms of daily life. But not all interactions with the Jinn were born of fear. The folklore of ancient Arabia is also rich with tales of a different kind of relationship, one of inspiration, friendship, and even love. One legend, for example, tells of a Jinn named Manzir who fell in love with a mortal woman named Haba. He did not seek to harm her, but instead taught her the arts of healing as a sign of his affection. Such stories presented the Jinn as being capable of the full range of human-like emotions, from petty jealousy and rage to profound love and loyalty. Nowhere was this intimate connection more apparent than in the world of Arab poetry and soothsaying. It was a widely and deeply held belief that every great poet had a personal Jinn, a special companion spirit, sometimes called a Qur'an, who served as their supernatural muse. This spirit would whisper verses to the poet from beyond the human world, granting them a fluency and a power with words that seemed more than mortal. Poets themselves would sometimes acknowledge this otherworldly source of their genius. The renowned pre-Islamic poet Al-Arsha, for instance, referred to a companion named Mishal as his Jinn brother, the direct source of his poetic inspiration. To have a powerful Jinn muse was a mark of honor, a sign that a poet's words were not just clever, but were touched by the magic of the unseen world. This connection was not always a blessing. The story of another famous pre-Islamic poet, Thabit bin Jabir, nicknamed Ta'abata Sharan, meaning he who packed evil in his luggage, is a testament to the darker side of this relationship. He famously boasted in his poetry of encountering and slaying a female Ghoul, a fearsome type of Jinn, in the desert. These anecdotes, woven into the very fabric of their oral tradition, illustrate just how deeply the Jinn were a part of the cultural and artistic life of the tribes. Poets took pride in these otherworldly connections, framing their creative genius as a gift, or sometimes a curse, from the realms of the Jinn. This belief in Jinn as keepers of hidden knowledge extended to the figure of the soothsayer or Kahin. In pre-Islamic society, the Kahins were powerful and respected figures. People would consult them for arbitration in disputes, for prophecies about the future, and for their connection to the unseen world. It was believed that the Kahin's power came directly from a Jinn who would possess him or speak through him. The Kahin would enter a trance-like state and then deliver rhyming, often cryptic oracles, supposedly channeling the hidden knowledge of his spirit companion. Thus, the Jinn were seen as guardians of secrets. They roamed in unseen dimensions. They could travel faster than any human, and they could hear things that mortal ears could not. In later Islamic law, this belief would evolve into the idea that Jinn could eavesdrop on the conversations of angels in the heavens, stealing glimpses of divine decrees. But in the pre-Islamic world, their knowledge was more terrestrial, yet no less powerful. They were the key to unlocking the mysteries of the present and the future. And so, we see the pre-Islamic Jinn in all its multifaceted complexity. It was at once a feared demon of the lonely places, a source of inspiration for the greatest art of its time, and even an occasional friend or lover to humans. The people of ancient Arabia respected the Jinn as a parallel race of beings, their invisible neighbors sharing the same harsh and beautiful world. And from this deep and abiding belief, they developed a rich tapestry of myths, rituals, and practices to deal with them. It was this complex and deeply ingrained worldview that set the stage for how the new faith of Islam would later incorporate, confront, and ultimately transform the concept of the Jinn forever. As the 7th century dawned, a new revelation swept out from the heart of Arabia, a spiritual and social force that would not only reshape the political map of the world, but also redraw the very landscape of the unseen. With the advent of Islam, the ancient, deeply rooted belief in the Jinn was not abolished, not dismissed as a pagan superstition to be forgotten. Instead, it was confronted, absorbed, and fundamentally redefined within a strict, coherent, monotheistic framework. The wild, immoral spirits of the desert were about to be given a place in a grand cosmic drama, complete with a divine purpose, a moral compass, and the promise of eternal judgment. The Jinn were being brought into the light of a new theology. The Qur'an, the holy book of Islam, speaks of the Jinn frequently, not as a strange new concept to be explained, but as a simple, accepted reality, assuming its audience is already intimately familiar with these beings. In Islamic theology, they are affirmed as one of the 3 intelligent creations of God, distinct from both humans and angels. The Quran explicitly states the hierarchy of their creation. Humans were made from clay, and angels, according to later traditions, were made from pure light. But the Jinn, the scripture says, we created before from a smokeless fire. This poetic phrase, marij min nar, describes a substance of pure, scorching heat, a subtle fire without the earthly impurity of smoke. This fiery nature is the very essence of their being. It is the source of their power, their passion, and their unique place in the cosmos, a state between the material form of humanity and the ethereal form of angels. This shared status as intelligent creations brought with it a profound and revolutionary new purpose. The pre-Islamic Jinn were forces of nature, their actions as meaningless as a storm or an earthquake. But Islam gave them a reason to exist. In a pivotal verse, the Quran declares, "And I did not create the Jinn and mankind except to worship me." For the first time, the Jinn were placed on the same spiritual plane as human beings. They were moral, sentient beings, endowed with free will, the ability to choose between obedience and rebellion, between faith and disbelief. They would be held accountable for their choices on the Day of Judgment, destined for the same paradise or the same punishment as their human counterparts. Islam had elevated the Jinn from a shadowy folk belief into an integral part of its cosmology. This new moral dimension is most vividly illustrated in the Quranic chapter named after them, Surah al-Jinn. The chapter recounts the story of a group of Jinn who, while traveling, happened to overhear the Prophet Muhammad reciting the Quran. They were so moved by the beauty and truth of its message that they immediately embraced Islam. They returned to their own kind, not as simple spirits, but as missionaries declaring, "Among us are those who are righteous and those who are otherwise. We have become of various paths." The Quran presents them as moral agents, stating, "Among us some are obedient and some are unjust." This narrative was transformative. It meant the Jinn were no longer a monolithic force to be feared. They were now a diverse community, divided, just like humans, into believers and disbelievers, the pious and the wicked. The Prophet Muhammad was not just a messenger to humanity, he was a messenger to all beings with free will, both mankind and Jinnkind. While Islam confirmed the existence of the Jinn, it simultaneously launched a direct and uncompromising assault on the pre-Islamic practices surrounding them. The old ways of seeking refuge with them, of offering them sacrifices, of fearing them as one would a god, were condemned in the harshest possible terms. This was a form of shirk or idolatry, the greatest sin in Islam. The Qur'an describes how the Jinn themselves were astonished that humans had revered them, saying, "And there were men from mankind who sought refuge in men from the Jinn, so they only increased them in burden." This was a clear and total break. The Jinn were creatures, not divinities. They were servants of God, just like humans, and held no divine power of their own. To worship them or seek their aid was to turn away from the one true Creator. Yet, even as it corrected the theological errors of the past, Islam allowed many of the folkloric elements about the Jinn to carry over seamlessly into its worldview. Their defining characteristics, their ability to be invisible at will, to move with incredible speed, and to assume different shapes, were all accepted as part of their God-given fiery nature. The Quran itself provides a stunning example of their power in the story of the Prophet Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. When Solomon wishes to have the Queen's magnificent throne brought to him before she arrives, a powerful Jinn, identified as an Ifrit, boasts that he can transport it in the blink of an eye. This story affirms that Jinn possess extraordinary strength and abilities that seem magical to human eyes. However, the Quran is equally clear about their limitations. They are not all-knowing. They have no knowledge of the Ghaib, the unseen future, which is known only to God. The story of Solomon's death provides a powerful lesson in this regard. The Jinn, who had been forced to labor for him, continued their work, unaware that he had died, propped up on his staff. They only realized their master was gone when a small creature gnawed through the staff, and his body finally fell. The message was clear. For all their power, the Jinn are as ignorant of the divine plan as any human. In the Islamic worldview, they are basically another race of creatures, living a parallel existence on Earth, concealed from normal sight, endowed with free will, capable of both good and evil, and ultimately, like all of creation, subject to the absolute authority of God. While Islamic scripture speaks mostly of Jinn in general terms, a rich and terrifying bestiary of different types and classifications developed over the centuries, blending Quranic references with older Arab lore and regional myths. At the top of this dark hierarchy is the figure of Shaitan, or Satan. The Quran makes a crucial theological clarification about his identity. In Arabian and biblical lore, it was easy to confuse Jinn with fallen angels. But the Quran is explicit. Iblis, the proper name of Satan, was not an angel. It states he was one of the Jinn and he violated his Lord's command. This is a pivotal point. Angels in Islam are created from light and have no free will. They cannot disobey God. Jinn, created from fire, can. The story of Iblis is the ultimate example of this choice. When God commanded all the angels and Iblis to bow down to Adam, the first man, Iblis refused out of pride and arrogance. For this single act of defiance, he was cast out and became the great adversary, the tempter whose goal is to mislead both Jinn and humans from the righteous path. The term shaitan thus came to mean any malignant, rebellious Jinn, a devil who was chosen to follow the path of Iblis. It is not a separate species, but a moral designation for a wicked Jinn. Perhaps the most famous type of Jinn in storytelling is the Ifrit. The word appears once in the Quran to describe the powerful genie in Solomon's court, and over time, it came to denote a particularly strong and fearsome class of Jinn. In folklore, Ifrits are often portrayed as massive, winged demons, their bodies formed from smoke and fire, sometimes with terrifying, monstrous faces and flaming eyes. They are depicted as living in underground kingdoms or in ancient ruins, organized into their own tribes with kings and chiefs. They are said to be impervious to ordinary weapons and incredibly difficult to kill. The Ifrit's notoriety was cemented by its appearance in the tales of the 1001 Nights. The story of the fisherman and the genie, for example, features a furious Ifrit who has been trapped in a brass bottle for centuries, a direct echo of the legends of Sulaymān. They are almost always malevolent, or at the very least, dangerously capricious, a vision of raw, elemental power and ancient, vengeful fury. A term often used interchangeably with the Ifrit is the marid, which means rebellious in Arabic. A marid is described as a powerful, arrogant demon, a giant among Jinn, known for their immense strength and pride. While the word is hinted at in the Qur'an in a verse referring to every rebellious devil, its character was truly fleshed out in later folklore. In popular tales, marids are the classic genies, who can be bound to an object, like a lamp or a bottle, and are capable of granting wishes to mortals, though usually at a great and terrible price. They are portrayed as being harder to control than other Jinn, due to their proud and rebellious nature. This image of the marid was heavily influenced by Persian mythology, where the evil Deebs were powerful demons subdued by heroes. In Islamic lore, the marid and the Ifrit became the heavyweights of the Jinn world, the mightiest and most haughty of their kind. Of all the Jinn, none is more infamous for its direct and gruesome connection to humanity than the Ghoul, or Ghoul. In ancient Arabian folklore, the Ghoul was a specific subset of Jinn known for haunting graveyards and other deserted places, where it would prey upon unwary travelers. The very word Ghoul means to seize, and they are depicted as flesh-eating, shape-shifting demons. Pre-Islamic poetry is filled with references to them. The poet Ta'abata Sharan famously boasted of slaying a ghoul in the desert. They often appear as monstrous women, luring lone travelers by taking the form of a beautiful woman, only to reveal their horrific true nature at the last moment to devour their victim. Lore is filled with tales of their telltale signs. One legend says, a ghoul's feet never change shape, so it might still have the hooves of a donkey even when appearing in human form. Islamic tradition held an ambivalent stance on ghouls. The Quran itself never mentions them, and some rationalist scholars denied their existence entirely. Yet, hadiths and folklore kept the belief alive with terrifying vitality. One story from the early caliphate claims that Umar ibn al-Khattab, a companion of the Prophet, encountered a ghoul on a journey to Syria and struck it down with his sword. Another famous tale tells of another companion, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who caught a ghoul stealing food from his storage. The ghoul, a female Jinn, pleaded for her life and, in exchange for her freedom, taught him a protective verse from the Quran to ward off her kind. When he recounted this to the Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet confirmed, "She told the truth, though she is a liar." This fascinating comment suggests that even the most deceptive of Jinn can speak the truth when it serves them. Over time, in the Islamic imagination, the ghoul became just another name for a particularly vicious and evil type of Jinn, a monstrous predator representing the most frightening and cannibalistic aspect of the unseen world. A close relative of the ghoul in Arabian folklore is the Sila. Early texts sometimes used the terms interchangeably, but later distinctions arose. A Sila is generally described as a witch-like female Jinn, a jinniyah who is an expert shapeshifter and a deadly seductress. Unlike ghouls, who might take many forms, the Sila was often said to appear as an enchantingly beautiful woman, luring men into marriage or a dangerous affair, only to eventually betray or kill them. They became a byword for the treacherous femme fatale, a cautionary tale about the dangers of supernatural beauty. Legends claim they could be identified by subtle animal features they could not hide, like cat-like eyes or a forked tongue. There is even an Arabian legend about a tribe called the Banu Silat, who were supposedly the offspring of a union between a human man and a Sila, their children possessing strange hybrid qualities. These tales reflect a deep-seated belief that Jinn and humans could, at least in myth, interbreed. The Sila, along with the Ghoul, represents the archetypal enchantress and the monstrous feminine in the folklore of the Jinn. Of all the figures in Islamic tradition, none is more famously and powerfully associated with the Jinn than the Prophet Sulaymān or Sulaymān. Building on Jewish traditions of a king with a magical seal ring that could control demons, the Qur'an and later Islamic law portray Solomon as a prophet who was granted a unique and miraculous gift by God, dominion over the Jinn. The Qur'an states, "And there were gathered before Solomon his armies of Jinn, men and birds." He could understand their languages and command them to do his bidding. This was not a power Solomon achieved through magic. It was a divine authority, a sign of his status as a prophet and a king. The stories of his reign are filled with incredible accounts of the Jinn's service. They worked for him as master builders and craftsmen, forging fantastic works in copper and iron. Islamic legend credits them with the construction of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, a feat of impossible engineering accomplished through their supernatural strength. They were his divers, plunging to the bottom of the sea to mine for gems and bring him exotic treasures. They were his messengers, his laborers, his army. The Quran uses Solomon's story in part to show that even the greatest human king ruled only by God's permission, and that such incredible forces could only be harnessed through a divine gift, not through human sorcery. Islamic legend expands greatly on these scriptural hints. A famous tale recounts how Solomon possessed a brass vessel, or many of them, in which he would imprison rebellious Jinn, sealing the vessel with the name of God and casting them into the sea. This is the direct origin of the genie in a bottle trope immortalized in the Arabian Nights. This power also extended to the most evil of their kind, the shayatin, the devils. Solomon kept them in check, forcing their power to serve the cause of righteousness. Another legendary episode involves Solomon's encounter with the Queen of Sheba, known as Bilqis. Later folklore gave this story a Jinn twist, with rumors that Bilqis herself had Jinn lineage, evidenced by supposedly hairy or hoof-like feet. The story demonstrates how even human historical figures could become entangled in the lore of the Jinn. But the most profound story is of Solomon's final days. Late in his reign, a shape-shifting Jinn is said to have stolen his ring of power and usurped his throne, forcing Solomon into a period of exile until he could recover his kingdom. It is a cautionary tale, a reminder that Solomon's control was a gift that could be withdrawn, and that even the great master of the Jinn was not immune to their cunning if God willed it. Solomon's story is the ultimate chapter in the human-Jinn relationship, a golden age where these powerful, fiery beings were, for a time, brought under the command of a single, righteous human king, a powerful symbol of divinely ordered control over the chaotic forces of the unseen world. The legacy of Solomon was a story of ultimate control, a golden age where the chaotic power of the Jinn was brought to heel by a single, divinely appointed king. But Solomon was a miracle, a singular event in human history. For ordinary people, for the farmers, merchants, and families living in the centuries that followed, the relationship with the Jinn was not one of command, but of a precarious and often terrifying coexistence. The Jinn were not a distant myth. They were a daily reality, their presence woven into the fabric of home, health, and the hidden landscape of the human mind. The grand cosmic drama of their creation was mirrored in the small, intimate dramas of human interaction, a relationship that ran the full gamut from hostile possession to whispered inspiration, from outright conflict to a strange and secret love. Perhaps the most dramatic and feared of all these interactions is possession, the belief that a jinn can enter and take control of a human body. This is a conviction found in cultures across the globe, but in the Islamic world, it took on a specific and deeply theological dimension. When a person's behavior changed suddenly and inexplicitly, when they began speaking in strange voices, exhibiting knowledge they should not have, or displaying a violent aversion to prayer and Holy Scripture, the diagnosis was often demonic possession. The symptoms were a classic sign that a genie had breached the fortress of the body and was now waging a war for the soul within. The cure for such a spiritual affliction is a practice known as ruqya, a form of exorcism that relies not on magic or occult rituals, but on the pure, unadulterated power of the divine word. In Islamic practice, skilled healers, or raqis, would confront the possessing entity by reciting specific verses from the Qur'an over the afflicted person. The most powerful of these is Ayat al-Kursi, the verse of the throne, a passage of immense spiritual weight that described the absolute power and knowledge of God. It was believed that for a malevolent jinn, for a creature of fire and rebellion, hearing these words was an agony, a spiritual fire that would burn and torment them, forcing them to either flee the body or be destroyed. Other powerful verses, like the final 2 chapters of the Qur'an, known as the Mu'awwidhatayn, were also used, directly asking God for refuge from the evil of his creation. The exorcism session itself was a dramatic confrontation. The healer might use blessed water, over which Quranic verses had been recited, sprinkling it on the patient. They might use aromatic smoke, like incense, to irritate the jinn and force it out. The possessed person would often react violently, their body convulsing as the jinn within them fought back, sometimes speaking through them, begging, cursing, or trying to bargain with the exorcist. These cases were often interpreted in 2 ways. Either the jinn was maliciously attacking a random victim, or, in a strangely personal twist, it had fallen in love with its human host and was possessing them out of a jealous, otherworldly desire. Importantly, Islam strictly condemns the use of sorcery or seer to deal with jinn. To invoke other jinn for help, to use occult talismans, or to engage in any ritual not sanctioned by scripture was forbidden, a dangerous path that only compounded the evil. The only legitimate weapon was prayer, a direct appeal to God, the one true master of all creation, to command his rebellious creature to submit. Given these potential dangers, a significant part of daily religious life for Muslims was dedicated to protection, to creating a spiritual shield that would ward off the jinn before they could ever cause harm. The most powerful of these measures was the simple but profound act of mentioning God's name. The Prophet Muhammad taught that saying Bismillah, in the name of God, before entering a home, before eating or drinking, or before undressing, created a barrier that jinn could not penetrate. This practice integrated the awareness of the unseen world into the most mundane moments of life. Every closed door, every meal, every moment of privacy was sanctified and protected by this simple invocation. Specific prayers, or dua, were also taught for moments of particular vulnerability. Before entering the bathroom, a place considered ritually impure and thus a potential haunt of jinn, one was taught to seek refuge in God from the male and female devils. Upon entering a home, a prayer was recited that placed the act of entering and leaving under God's protection. Parents would teach these small phrases to their children from a young age, weaving a shield of divine remembrance around their domestic life, a constant, low-level spiritual defense against any lurking, unseen entities. Beyond these daily practices, certain verses of the Qur'an were regarded as powerful deterrents. The verse of the throne, Ayat al-Kursi, was not just a tool for exorcism, it was the ultimate shield. Many Muslims recite it before sleeping, hang it as calligraphy in their homes, or play recordings of it based on the hadith story of the Ghoul, who confessed to a companion that its recitation keeps devils away until dawn. The last 3 chapters of the Qur'an were likewise recited for protection from all forms of evil, both human and Jinn. While orthodox scholars often frowned upon it as bordering on superstition, some people would also carry charms or tau amulets containing these Quranic verses as a form of personal protection. These scriptural defenses were often blended with older folk practices, the burning of certain types of incense, the wearing of blue beads to ward off the evil eye, a force often linked to the Jinn, or the sprinkling of salt around a new home. The underlying mindset was one of cautious piety, to trust in God, but to take the necessary spiritual precautions to avoid inviting trouble from his more mischievous creations. On the flip side of protection is the belief that Jinn can, and do, inflict harm, either in retaliation for an offense or out of sheer malevolence. In many traditional communities, various misfortunes were laid at their feet. A baby crying incessantly might be thought to have been pinched by an unseen Jinn. Nightmares were often seen as the work of a Jinn playfully or cruelly frightening a person in their sleep. This blame extended to physical accidents. If someone tripped for no apparent reason, a person might say, half-jokingly, a Jinn pushed him. The most serious blame, however, was reserved for illness. Sudden sicknesses with strange symptoms were often labeled Jinn sickness, prompting a consultation with a spiritual healer to determine if the cause was medical or supernatural. This deep connection to affliction is embedded in the very language of the culture. As we've noted, the Arabic word for a mad person, majnun, literally means Jinn afflicted, a linguistic fossil proving how ancient and fundamental the link is between these spirits and the concept of mental illness. For centuries, what we would now diagnose as a range of psychological conditions was seen as either outright possession or at least an obsession, a state where a Jinn constantly whispers madness into a person's mind. While modern medicine has created a clearer distinction for many, in some communities, the line remains blurry, a space where spiritual and psychological healing are seen as 2 parts of the same whole. Beyond direct harm to people, Jinn are also implicated in hauntings. A house where doors slam, objects move on their own, or strange noises are heard might be believed to have a resident Jinn. This is especially true if the house is old, empty, or built on a site with a dark history, aligning with the Jinn's known love for ruins and desolate places. This belief would lead people to avoid certain locales at certain times of day, like a well at high noon or a crossroads at midnight, as these were considered liminal times and spaces where Jinn were thought to be most active, and the lone human most vulnerable to being harassed or deceived. Surprisingly, folklore is also filled with stories that go beyond simple conflict, stories of romance, marriage, and family between humans and Jinn. These tales reveal a belief in Jinn as beings physically real enough to form the most intimate of human bonds. Some of these are cautionary tales. A man unknowingly marries an incredibly beautiful woman who is later revealed to be a Sila, or a Ghoul in disguise. A monstrous bride who eventually reveals her true, terrifying nature. Other stories are more benign, even romantic. There are Middle Eastern legends of a kindly Jinn princess who falls in love with a mortal hero and uses her powers to help him, or of a human woman who marries a male Jinn who can appear handsome and human, but must periodically revert to his true, fiery form. In the lore of some Arab tribes, their very founders were said to have had Jinn ancestry. One Yemeni tribe, for example, boasted of its descent from a union between a human man and a Jinn mother, and in such legends, the half-Jinn offspring are always endowed with extraordinary qualities, like superhuman strength or poetic genius. While these stories are not taken as literal fact, they illustrate a deep cultural conception of Jinn as a parallel species, physically compatible with humans. This belief even surfaces in contemporary times. One still hears anecdotes, especially in more traditional societies, of individuals claiming their spouse is a Jinn, or of people who believe they have a spirit lover. As we've seen, in exorcism practices, a very common scenario is a Jinn who claims to have fallen in love with a person and is possessing them out of jealousy. The healer must then act as a kind of supernatural marriage counselor, trying to persuade or force the Jinn to leave his beloved. Islamically, marrying a Jinn is not explicitly forbidden, but it is strongly discouraged by scholars for a host of obvious practical and theological reasons. The very fact that such a union was a subject for legal debate, however, shows just how seriously the tangible, physical nature of the Jinn was taken. Beyond these accidental or fated encounters, there are those humans who have actively sought out the Jinn, not for love, but for power. This veers into the forbidden realm of sorcery, or seer. While Solomon had divine permission to command the Jinn, ordinary people, it was believed, could only bind them through illegitimate magic, often involving rituals that were deeply displeasing to God, such as performing blasphemous acts or making animal sacrifices in the name of a Jinn king. Historically, magicians and witch doctors in many Muslim communities claimed to be able to control or communicate with Jinn. Folk grimoires, notorious medieval Arabic books of magic like the Shams al-Ma'arif, purported to teach the secret rituals needed to summon a genie and compel it to perform tasks, fetch treasures, or carry out curses. Those who attempt such practices are often believed to pay a heavy price. The Jinn, being masters of deceit, might help for a time, but the cautionary tales warn that they will often trick or destroy the sorcerer in the end. This dynamic between the summoner and the exorcist has been a part of the social fabric in many places for centuries. On one side, the dark magician who seeks to harness the Jinn's power for worldly gain. On the other, the pious healer who uses the word of God to break the Jinn's influence and nullify their magic. This relationship between humans and Jinn, however, is not always one of conflict or forbidden pacts. There are also accounts of benevolent Jinn helping humans out of kindness or a sense of shared faith. Islamic law makes a clear distinction from Muslim Jinn, those who have accepted Islam and follow its teachings. Such Jinn would, in theory, view pious humans as their brethren. There are anecdotes, especially in the tales of Sufi saints, of a righteous man lost in the desert being guided to safety by an unseen voice, said to be a Muslim genie. Some traditional healers claim that good Jinn assist them in finding herbal cures, saying, "My Jinn guide showed me this plant." These stories underscore the belief that Jinn are not all devils, many are neutral or even good, and a human and a Jinn could, in theory, have a beneficial relationship, provided it remains within the bounds of Islamic law. Within Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam, the interpretation of Jinn takes on a profound symbolic dimension. While Sufi masters and writers fully acknowledge the literal existence of Jinn as real creatures, they were not central to their cosmology in the same way as the human relationship with God. Instead, Sufis often use the language of Jinn and devils as a powerful metaphor for the inner landscape of the soul. The struggle against one's lower self, the nafs, was often described as fighting the demons within. A sudden thought of greed, of pride, of lust that distracts one from prayer could be seen both as a literal whisper from a shaitan and as a symbolic manifestation of one's own untamed ego. In this mystical framework, Iblis, the great Jinn who refused to bow, is sometimes interpreted not just as an external tempter, but as the ultimate symbol of the defiant, arrogant ego that resides in all of us. Parables, like Solomon's subjugation of the Jinn, were read as powerful allegories. Solomon, the wise king, represents the enlightened soul, and the Jinn and devils he commands are the wild, chaotic passions of the self-anger, desire, pride, which the soul must learn to control and harness rather than be ruled by them. The struggle against the Jinn in the Sufi view was often a projection of the far more important and difficult inner battle, the jihad al-nafs, the war against the self. They are more like a parallel populace that occasionally intersects with the human spiritual journey, but they are not the ultimate source of temptation. The human ego is, nor are they the ultimate spiritual ideal, which is reserved for the prophets and a direct relationship with God. In our modern world, far from the deserts of ancient Arabia, the belief in Jinn persists with remarkable tenacity. For devout Muslims, the Qur'an's word is timeless, and therefore, Jinn are as real in the 21st century as they were in the 7th. In many communities, these beliefs continue to actively inform behavior. It is still common for families to recite protective verses daily, or to say Bismillah when pouring hot water outside. In cases of mental illness or other mysterious ailments, many families will concurrently seek a ruqya session alongside modern medical treatment, seeing the two not as contradictory, but as complementary approaches to healing the body and the spirit. The internet has given this ancient belief a new and powerful platform. Videos of real exorcisms circulate widely on social media, and online forums are filled with personal anecdotes of Jinn encounters, continuing the oral tradition of storytelling in a digital format. This ancient belief has also made a profound journey into global pop culture, but in the process, it has been utterly transformed. Through the influence of the Arabian Nights, and most powerfully through Western adaptations like Disney's Aladdin, the formidable and dangerous genie of Islamic lore has been largely replaced in the popular imagination by the genie. This figure is often a comical, benign, and obedient servant bound to a lamp and obligated to grant 3 wishes. This is a huge divergence from the independent, morally accountable, and often dangerous being of the original traditions. The blue, jovial genie voiced by Robin Williams has very little in common with a raging Ifrit trapped in a bottle, his portrayal emphasizing wish fulfillment and humor rather than spiritual terror. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Western horror has embraced the Jinn as a new kind of demon. Films and television shows often depict them as purely malevolent monsters, stripping them of their moral complexity and their capacity for good. Fantasy and gaming have also adopted them, often categorizing them as elemental spirits, fire Ifriti, water Marids, earth Jann, borrowing the names from medieval classifications, but placing them in a new, non-religious fantasy ecology. Through this process of cultural exchange, the Jinn have achieved a global recognition that few mythological creatures can match. But in their journey from the sacred texts of Arabia to the screens of Hollywood, they have shape-shifted once more, becoming a reflection not of an ancient faith, but of our own modern appetite for fantasy, horror, and spectacle. We have journeyed from the sun-scorched sands of pre-Islamic Arabia, where the Jinn were the wild, untamed spirits of the earth, to the ordered cosmology of Islam, where they were given a moral purpose and a place in a divine cosmic plan. We have walked through the fantastic courts of the Prophet Solomon, the master of their kind, and listened in on the terrifying fireside tales of ghouls and ifrits that haunted the popular imagination for centuries. From a creature born of desert animism, to a theological entity with free will, and finally to a global pop culture icon, the Jinn has proven to be one of history's most resilient and adaptable supernatural beings. Its long and winding story is a testament to the power of a belief that has survived the rise and fall of empires, the birth of new religions, and the dawning of a scientific age that sought to banish all such phantoms from the world. What is the secret to this incredible endurance? Perhaps it lies in the Jinn's fundamental ambiguity. They are the ultimate liminal creature, existing in the spaces in between. They are neither Holy Spirit nor holy flesh. They are not angels, yet they can be pious. They are not devils, yet they can be irredeemably evil. They are not human, yet they mirror our societies, our emotions, our capacity for both faith and rebellion. This refusal to fit neatly into any single category is the key to their survival. They are a vessel, a perfect screen onto which humanity can project its most profound anxieties and its most secret desires. They are the face we give to the random misfortune we cannot explain, the name we give to the dark impulses that rise from within our own minds, and the hope we harbor for a world of magic and possibility that exists just beyond the veil of our senses. In this way, the story of the Jinn is more than just a history of a mythological creature. It is a mirror reflecting our own evolving relationship with the unseen. In the pre-Islamic world, they were the embodiment of a chaotic and dangerous nature that had to be placated. In the Islamic world, they became a reflection of humanity's own moral struggle, a parallel race facing the same choices and the same ultimate judgment. And in our modern, secular world, their transformation into the wish-granting genie or the generic horror movie demon reflects our own contemporary relationship with the supernatural, a force to be either commodified for our entertainment or stripped of all nuance to serve a simple, terrifying narrative. In every era, the Jinn transforms, not because it is fickle, but because we are. They are the clay, and the human imagination is the sculptor, constantly reshaping them to fit the contours of our own time. The enduring belief in these beings, even in our age of satellites and spreadsheets, speaks to a fundamental and perhaps unquenchable human need. It is the need for a world that is more than just what we can see and measure. The story of the Jinn is a testament to the fact that we have always lived in two worlds at once: the solid, predictable world of our daily lives, and a second, more fluid and mysterious world of the spirit. It is this second world that gives us our myths, our art, our religions, and our sense of wonder. The Jinn are a powerful reminder that for all our logic and reason, we remain creatures who are haunted by the unseen, who listen for voices on the wind, and who feel a shiver of ancient fear when entering a dark and silent room. They prove that a world completely explained, a world without shadows, may be a world that is ultimately unlivable for the human soul. And so, the creature of smokeless fire endures. Its story, which began in the whispering sands of an ancient desert, is now told in the flickering light of digital screens and echoed in the shared ether of a global culture. It has shapeshifted once more from a local spirit to a global phenomenon, a journey even a mighty Ifrit could scarcely have imagined. The Jinn remains a powerful and unsettling presence in the human imagination, a permanent resident in the borderlands between faith and folklore, between the known and the unknowable. And as long as there are empty places in the world, as long as there are unexplained sounds in the night, and as long as there is a part of the human mind that yearns for a reality beyond its own, the Jinn will have a home, forever concealed, forever present, a timeless reminder that we are not and have never been truly alone.